socially radical, socially radical, socially radical. Socially radical, socially radical, socially radical, guitarist. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Socially Radical Guitarist. The song you heard just now was from Casiopea. It was kind of a remake album of their older songs called The Asian Dreamer. And the song was Galactic Funk. Quite a gem, quite an excellent song. I'll be going over that in a little bit. So, just to do the regular disclaimer, anything I say on the show and any of the comments made by the host are the opinions of mine and the host alone. They have nothing to do with Radio Waterloo, any of its subsidiaries, or any of its affiliates. So, try as you might, no, you cannot sue public radio. Don't sue the nonprofit either. The opinions are my own. The nonprofit ASIC Canada is sponsoring me, but the opinions of mine and the host are uniquely ours. So don't sue the nonprofit either. Support the nonprofit and also support the Canada Files because they are having a fundraising drive. And our guest, Aidan Jonah, wants people to support that to make sure that that perspective of the news gets out. So just to get into the song, quite excellent, quite excellent. The way that octaves are used and the creativity of the melody, it kind of like this is definitely a pioneer song that sets the standard for the evolution of the music into the 90s. Not only in Japan, where the Casiopea is from, but all around the world. So let's go to, the opening melody. And yeah, so you'll hear that melody and the way he transitions into kind of a little bit of a bridge sort of thing. It's kind of like a little bit of a pre-chorus actually. So yeah, um, I'll transition into that, and the way he'll go from that song to the transitions is quite brilliant. Um, you'll have a little bit of a chord change in the actual bridge. Excuse me, that was a pre-chorus, but this is the bridge. And then he gives the drum his solo, and then he'll use the octaves to try to just fill the spaces while the drummer is having the solo and then the bass player is having the solo. And that's um, that shows you the strength of Issei Noro because he wrote this song. As a guitarist, he wrote this song, arranged it for all of the musicians, and also um, uh, he's also doing the lead, and he's having his solo, and the solo is pretty amazing. So, what could have been if music had evolved from the 90s using that, what was happening in the 70s and the 80s as a base, as a baseline? Because this sort of music, this fusion was inspiring every genre. Metal, it was inspiring rock, classic rock, um, all of the, even, hip hop a little bit in the 90s. Um, that fusion jazz, which emerged from the older jazz, was helping to really shape and reform music, and consciousness was basically emerging. A lot of reactionary stuff had happened in the 70s after um, the ruling class feared the uprising of the rest of the workers, particularly in the United States and in Canada after they resisted Vietnam. So, um, what ended up happening was first, even though the computer emerges and the production of the workers increases, their wages don't go up with it. They turn everything into a credit system to make the workers um, kind of more like debt servants, to kind of hyper exploit them even more in order to have to pay a mortgage into their house, which they wouldn't have to do before. They could work and pay off the house in like 4 or 5 years, but that wasn't possible anymore. And then the same thing happened with their car, an important thing that they needed to get to work. So that happens, and cultures degenerated gradually. So, musicians were very inspirational and influential in the emergence of communist movements and revolutionary movements, particularly in the 70s. So it actually became an important point to crack down on proletarian culture. And it began gradually, first with kind of the phasing out of jazz and the phasing out of other, like, really thought out and really inspirational music. Then the 90s comes, and then the 2000s, where the bourgeois impose their culture on the music, control music, commodify everything. So the 90s is what happens when, Bill Clinton and, other major leaders, capitalist leaders around the world, allow um, cultural propagation to be monopolized. They monopolize the press and other instruments. So that's why Aidan Jonah's work is going to be very important in the future, and why it's important to mention what had happened in the past, what's happening currently, and why we need an alternative press. Because bourgeois control of the press is clearly shown to be disastrous, even for cultural propagation. So, yeah, Aiden will be coming up next. Remember to go to the Canada Files and support the fundraiser if you can. If you're a member of the bourgeoisie and don't want the reckoning from the workers in the coming revolution, show that you support the initiatives, support ASIC initiatives, and support the Canada Files as well, especially if you have deep pockets. Think about that if you don't want the wrath. And yeah, that's just joking a little bit. But yeah, so before Aidan Jonah comes next, we're gonna have a song from very long ago. Hello Herbie is a remake of older songs, and it's the Oscar Peterson trio with Herb Ellis. So the next song coming up is gonna be Naptown Blues. Um, Naptown Blues, sorry. Naptown Blues, and it's a rendition of a Wes Montgomery song by the Oscar Peterson Trio and Herb Ellis. Excellent music. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Uh, Song you heard just now was Oscar Peterson Trio and Herb Ellis doing their rendition of Naptown Blues. And I don't know what's more amazing, the fact that Oscar Peterson was playing chords like single notes, or the fact that Herb Ellis didn't seem out of place. Excellent musicians. That's a time that's really beyond us. Um, so we're now going to be speaking with our guest, and the guest is Aidan Jonah. He is the founder and the chief editor of the Canada Files. Hello, Aidan.
Hey, good to chat with you.
Yeah. It's good to have you on. Um, Thanks for accepting the invite. Um, so just to give a little bit of an intro to our viewers, like what inspired the Canada Files? How did it all begin? How many contributors would you say that you have now?
Sure thing. So it's interesting. The Canada Fellows had quite the journey. Of course, the Canada Fellows, to clarify, is a socialist, anti-imperialist investigative news site covering Canadian foreign policy. We've been going since November 2019. Obviously, I founded it as a site, and yeah, I was basically so that's the deal there. And the outlet has been really going strong, strong ever since then.
Oh yeah, like it looks like you have a lot of contributors. I mean, do you know the number? Or...
Sure. So some of them are not so active. Basically, it's the focus has shifted towards investigations. So that means there's kind of more at this point. There's more of a core team of you have myself, of course, editor in chief, and Aidan Jonah, and you have Daniel Z, who is the associate editor of the Canada Files. So it's me and him kind of make up the core team, and then we'll have other people write for the Canada Files once in a while. So we got a variety of people. What do you think about like Arnold August has had his writing published? I'm sure you're aware of his writings on Cuba. They're extensive. We've had people, let me think around here. Really, I mean, like you got people like Stephen Lala, who's written for the Canada Files before. We've had people we've been fortunate really to work with a lot of great people. It's definitely been an interesting transition. One of the more recent ones, person who started writing more is Owen Schalk, who's written a good one on Haiti, Venezuela, and Canada's relations there. So yeah, we've been fortunate enough to have some good writers along the way, and now we kind of have a bit more of a structure that is really built well for investigations.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really good for you is that there wasn't that outlet before. I think you were filling a void that really wasn't there for the media in Canada.
Yeah, I'd really agree. Actually, that was one of the core motivations to start this. I mean, it's one of those things where you certainly don't try to basically start an entire outlet by yourself at the age of 18 if you feel like there's other options that could be more of a manageable route that could do it justice. But there just, in my view, wasn't. And I think I've been proved right by that. And as things have come along, I think more and more people have realized that there is the need for that. And mainly that we are doing that. So the journalism that we promised. So yeah, very much I'd agree. There is a void to fill, and certainly it's made growing in the way that we have more possible, I think. And there's a lot more to go. There's a lot more further way to go, but it's been very good so far.
Yes, the youth generally do lead militant movements historically. That was the case even during 1917 with the Russian Revolution and during the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. So glad that you're an active youth and you're very militant. Um, I noticed there were two interesting articles that you personally wrote on the Canada Files. So one was on Christmas Eve, like you published it on Christmas Eve, was basically an article on Africa and Canada's engagement with that command in the AU. The other was the article on the NDP allegedly weaponizing the Palestinian struggle against China, if I got that accurately.
Yeah, no, you're correct on that front. Yep.
Yeah. So could you summarize first the AFRICOM article and then the NDP article, and could you maybe make a, say your opinion on whether the earlier AFRICOM article is still relevant to the current events?
Oh yeah, for sure. So with the article on AFRICOM, that was inspired by this webinar called AFRICOM and Human Rights in Africa that occurred around the end of 2020. And so AFRICOM, of course, is I think an organization that's very underappreciated in the sense that it's the core driver of U.S. militarism in Africa. And so of course, it's really just weaponized. It's just used to maintain U.S. economic hegemony and take the natural resources of countries without giving them even the space to breathe or the resources needed to develop their own economies in a sovereign manner. And so, Canada basically, obviously, AFRICOM is an American creation, but Canada has played very much a role, a really devastating role in Africa and adjacent to AFRICOM for a very long time. I mean, it's one of these things where, if you might remember, it was 1961 when the Canadian peacekeepers actually gave up the location of Congolese socialist leader Patrice Lumumba. That led to his death by a firing squad. Then you have in 1966, Ghanaian military trained by Canadian soldiers overthrow Pan-African President Kwame Nkrumah. And so you actually have, by the end of the 60s, like spending around the equivalent of 170 million today to train military forces of multiple African countries. So you have a long historical precedent, right? And these kind of things continue over the decades. And when things come back to head again is, of course, in 2011, the NATO bombing campaign against Libya. Canada was the country that led that. And Libya was actually the African country that it had achieved the highest progress on the Human Development Index. The leader, Muammar al-Gaddafi, was set to receive a UN prize. So he had even been working on creating a sovereign really currency for the African Union. It's a gold dinar. And really in retaliation for attempting to take any sort of independence, and look, the danger of a good example. You had the West basically spread propaganda and misinformation that led towards a campaign to destroy Libya. And look at the state of things now. Canada led that, and so many people to this day still don't get that we were the ones that led that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people definitely got taken a ride. And to be fair, even Gaddafi did with Obama. He thought Obama was a good Muslim in his view. That was his view of Obama when he had become president up until 2011, of course. Yeah, so I mean that's a pretty good summary of the disastrous policy of AFRICOM and basically NATO, which Canada led against Libya particularly. Like, can we move to the NDP article, the one where the Palestinian struggle you allege is being weaponized against China?
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah.
You want me to talk about that?
Yeah. Go to that, and then we'll try to connect these events and see how they're related.
Sure thing. So, at its very core, right? Basically, to clarify for people, the NDP or the CCF, and I mean social democracy in general, has always been supportive of imperial ambitions, right? So I mentioned Kautsky as an example, but then you have the CCF and the NDP supporting the Korean War, the creation of NATO, supporting the bombing campaign against Yugoslavia, invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, the destruction of Libya in 2011, and on and on and on. And so why this comes into importance is because you've had the Canadian Social Democrat Party and the New Democratic Party embrace strongly the supposed and debunked Xinjiang genocide narrative without even providing compelling evidence to actually challenge the reporting, because it's been outlets like the Gray Zone, people like Daniel Dumbrell, research institutes, and funny enough, even a USAID funded group called the Better Cotton Initiative. They've all refuted and debunked these really false claims. But that's just been flat out ignored. And I mean, even the Canada Files has contributed to that where it can, of course. And so they've just totally ignored that, right? And so it would be bad enough, because I think most of your listeners will know that basically on February 22nd, the NDP, all NDP MPs present in House of Commons, that's our legislative building for federally, they voted in favor of this conservative bill, Bill C-56, to falsely declare a Uyghur genocide, right? And so this is where kind of things come in, right? Is you have this NDP MP, Matthew Green, and he posits himself as a heroic socialist who's coming to save the day, make the NDP a great party. But the thing is that he's actually a remarkably dangerous figure, because he's essentially pushing an inherently social imperialism. Because what he's doing, right, is when there is a discussion about the Xinjiang genocide vote, the only complaint this guy made was that the conservative MPs weren't pushing for Palestine with the same energy as they were with Xinjiang. So inherently saying that the push to call Xinjiang genocide was a good thing, but the problem was that they weren't doing another good thing. And that's the dangerous narrative that Green was pushing, right? And so Green, the thing is, right, he didn't take the criticism even well, because the Canada Files had actually exposed that this National Endowment for Democracy funded organization, and so this is the CIA's cutout organization founded under Ronald Reagan in 1983. So it actually funded one of the star witness groups in the subcommittee report that then led to that genocide vote. It's the Uyghur Rights Action Advocacy Project, and its executive director, Mehmet Toti. And so you have him basically being with the subcommittee, right, that leads to the vote. You got 5 out of the 8 MPs joining the Parliamentary Uyghur Friendship Group that, guess what, the NED-funded Uyghur Rights Action Project Advocacy Project was actually one of the main pushers of. Just to give you an idea of the influence that this NED-funded organization had. And so when this was brought up, this criticism was brought up, and people were angry with him and other NDP MPs for voting with this, Green just responded by falsely claiming that China was an imperialist nation, which is just really out of bounds with reality. It simply is not a imperial or hegemonic country in the same negative way that America is. And so the thing is, right, that this actually, in a sense, there was a bit of a precedent, right, for Green to do this, because you had this columnist from this social democratic investigative outlet, which in my view is basically Canada's version. They want it to be Canada's version of The Intercept. And I think many people might be aware that, of course, they end up serving as lapdogs for American imperialism, only criticizing around the edges. And so you have this breach columnist, right, Aziza Kanji. So first of all, she was a star witness, another star witness, of course, in this subcommittee that led to the supposed genocide vote. And so the thing is, top it off, of course, right? Kanji also use the tactic that Green did. If you actually you read it through, so you'd see. So she actually went on the Kashmir solidarity cause, just out of the blue during this Q&A session for this event called Canada's Silence on India's Colonization of Kashmir. And yet again, of course, Kashmir, yeah, it is colonized. It is a just cause. But the thing is that she randomly, out of the blue during this event, just randomly changed topics to, I'm quoting from the article here, call out Canada's political class for not doing enough about the supposed ongoing genocide in Xinjiang. And so with Kanji and with Green, they're both pushing this line of trying to get these solidarity movements that are based off of just purposes and just goals to actually be manipulated into supporting these imperial aims. Kanji has gone, basically, she's called resistance to the Uyghur genocide narrative as being Islamophobo-leftism, I kid you not, has denounced supposedly China's supposed genocidal imperialism, and complained that anyone who challenges this narrative is a quote-unquote faux anti-imperialist. It's really wild here, right? And this would have been enough for an investigation on its own. But the thing is, Green kept this going, right? So you have this big event hosted by the Coalition of Canadian Palestinian Organizations on July 29th. It's a Palestine solidarity event, right? And so Green he went and did this narrative again. Basically, he pretty much openly said that he was absolutely good with the House of Commons calling China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims, falsely calling it a genocide. And he was trying to cynically make this point that just as Canada, of course, has flagged supposed genocide to push for a cancellation of the Olympic Games in Beijing 2022, it should also modify the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement to ensure that Israel upholds international law. And this is the core thing with Green, of course. This event was July 29th, by the way, is that it's making this false premise. It's making this false premise by lumping China in with an actually genocidal country like Israel. Like, you look at Israeli apartheid and how dangerous it is. To do this at an event really centered around Palestine solidarity is cynical and opportunist. It's aiming to try to have the NDP be a moral authority, when in fact it's just, Green and Kanji, they're just acting as useful, really, they're just acting as tools, really, of imperialism at the end of the day. And Green really is a dangerous figure because he has been fairly successful in positing himself as the exception to the rule in the NDP, this fierce, brave, anti-war activist. But in fact, yes, he'll engage in certain causes, but what he does is he pushes just as hard or even harder on these imperial narratives as the NDP top brass will. And so he has more credibility in then pushing these farcical narratives. And the thing is, we've seen in America, basically, I have to give credit to the Electronic Intifada podcast because they had Rania Khalek and Gray Zone editor Max Blumenthal on in separate cases. And they talked all about how the Libya and the Syria, the dirty war in Syria and the, of course, destruction of Libya, and of course, now I remember how you're connecting this, is these causes, right, in a similar way to the debunked Uyghur genocide narrative. These two causes were effectively used by opportunist elements in the American left to fracture the American Palestine solidarity movement. And that's taken years to recover. You have now basically Syria, you have terrorists in this country threatening a secular nation, a secular independent nation, basically. And then you have Libya with just the utter destruction of a state with slave markets, which it's just a disgrace. there's a clear pattern, right? Basically, this is just an imported tactic from America, but it's such a devastating tactic that it causes really bad effects for the world, of course, which is the most important thing. But it also just fractures these legitimate movements. And this could, if it's not dealt with, fracture the Palestine and Kashmiri solidarity movements. It's a really dangerous thing. And there's a reason why I stuck my neck out to write about this. Because look, Blumenthal and Kalik, they've done others a favor in talking about this, what happened in America. And this needs to be prevented in Canada. Basically, really at its core, there's a quote I picked at the end that I liked, there's this phrase of Karl Marx that I really sticks with me. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. The hope is that the case of America is the tragedy, and we can prevent that farce in Canada. But if people like Green, people like Kanji, if they succeed in pushing this narrative, whether they intend to or not, it's going to fracture the movements. It's going to make sure nothing gets done on those fronts. And it's going to provide the cover for left support of the Cold War on China. And so it's absolutely of key importance that, look, this gets combated.
Yeah. One thing that I want to bring attention to the viewers is that Mehmet Toki, the one that's leading the Uyghur solidarity movement in Canada, has admitted on CBC that he hasn't been in China since 1999. So that's another thing to note. That's about 10, 12 years before the alleged events of the genocide even occurred. So looking at all these events and how they're coming together, the U.S. has been pushed out of Afghanistan. It looks like they've been pushed out of the Middle East. And based on the way things are going now, there might be even more stability in Xinjiang, because a lot of the problems were coming from Afghanistan. But now that they've been pushed out, it looks like that's going to stabilize. And maybe that issue is not going to be there. There was also a push to, they're now shifting to Africa, basically. It looks like they're shifting to Africa. Military operations were ramped up in Somalia, and there's been a push to isolate Ethiopia. And
also DR Congo. If you check in, they've also been deploying troops to the Congo too. So
yes. Yeah, I mean, that's to deal with the Islamic terrorists in Congo, I think, that coincidentally always seem to show up whenever the US does. But that's just something to note. But so what's your take on those events? Like what's happening in Congo and why NATO policy seems to have shifted there? And is it related to a lot of the things you were talking about, weaponizing solidarity movements and basically AFRICOM?
Sure. So in the Congo, it's not something I've had the chance to keep the most eye on, mainly in the sense that it does actually, in fact, seem like realistically, it doesn't seem like Canada's involved with this at present, right? But in the case of Afghanistan, you have realistically a big case where it's a failure of imperial power, and with the presence of China's Belt and Road Initiative and the pressure of Russia, Iran, and other regional powers, they're going to act as stabilizing forces. And so I think there's I don't think the Taliban's good by any means. I mean, we all know it came to be as an anti-communist force to destroy the socialist Afghanistan Republic. But now it seems like it's going to be something of a wait and see approach, right? I think there's this problematic hysteria rather than cool-headed geopolitical analysis that's going on. And so I think that's the way that it should be stuck to. That's the way I see things anyways. Certainly, I think the U.S. is going to try to get into another war or another conflict for sure. I think that's a very big danger. I think Cuba there's really an attempt to drive it towards Cuba, but that failed, I think. And so that's really the way I see things anyways. I mean, Of course, the big thing to bring up is that the report on Canadian complicity in torture of Afghanistan citizens, and many not even of the Taliban, even though, of course, that's still not a justification. That report has still really never been fully released under conservative and liberal governments. You have 4,000 pages that parliamentarians could see, but not publicly released from everything I can see. And then 36,000 other pages that have just never been made available in any sort of way. And so I think that's going to be something I try to look into and dig into over time, because the fact is that has been something that slipped away from the public, and we should know about that, because it's one of those things where it's just yet another example of the devastation that Canadian imperialism causes, and why it's just so important that it gets tracked. I hear so many annoying things about, oh, Canadian foreign policy, it must be so boring. It's like, no, in fact, it's not. If you look at this stuff, it's insidious, nasty stuff, and it's really dangerous. And so there's still this problematic perspective, even among a lot of elements on the left, that just don't grasp what we've done. And so that's why I keep going on this work, because it's just, people need to understand what our country's been up to and what it continues to be up to.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely need to be more aware about the dark corners of Canada's foreign policy and domestic policy. I mean, you keep in mind, Taliban, yes, they definitely ran the whole country like a 1940s Catholic Church. But unlike the Catholic Church in Canada, none of the kids were sexually assaulted, and most of them left school, if not all of them, left the school alive. So that's already much better than the way Canada conducted themselves with the Indigenous community. So keep that in mind before you make judgments about the Taliban while you're living in Canada. So yeah, like and that brings us to, you know, the big question. The Canadian federal elections are coming up. So which party in Canada would you say has the best foreign policy, considering the new geopolitical events? And which party are you going to vote for?
So I would see the Communist Party of Canada having the best platform, and they're probably going to get my vote. I'm not a member myself, but I do have respect for their platform. And look, for me, it's the bravest one out there. So that'll be where I stand. I simply just don't see any of the mainstream parties as doing any sort of functions or even trying to resist imperialism at its core. And so if you're voting on foreign policy question alone, I see the Communist Party as the one to go for. I'm obviously not going to tell everyone how to vote, but at the same time, that's where I stand, right? So I just see them as the best party to vote for in this election.
So it's a vote as a matter of principle. Well, that's quite a ringing endorsement. So that'll be the end of the show, everyone. We're going to have our outro, and then we're going to have the song, which our guest picked. So Aidan, what's the song that we're leaving with?
That will be the California Dreaming from Wolf Parade.
Oh, yeah. California Dreamer from Wolf Parade. A great band coming out of Montreal. So, yeah, we're going to be heading out and have the outro, and then we'll have Aidan's California Dreamer ending the show, and that'll be it. We'll see you next week. Socially radical. Socially radical. Socially radical. Socially radical. Socially radical.